Hello, everyone. Welcome, ladies and gentlemen. This is your captain speaking. Please fasten your seatbelts and be ready to talk about a historical note on phantoms, MiGs, and kinematics, the math of dogfighting. I'm Eric Espinosa from Linköping University. And a little bit about myself. I have a pilot background, at least a pilot permit from Auto Aviation Services. Canada is beautiful to fly. Then I went into engineering. I did a bachelor's in mechanical engineering at Universidad Panamericana in Mexico City, where I am from. And then eventually decided to hop the pond and landed at Linköping University, where I did my master's in aeronautical engineering, where now I am a PhD candidate. For those of you who don't know, this is the city where they built the Gripen fighter aircraft from Saab. And it's also the city where our friends from Wolfram Math Corps are based. That's where I did an internship there. Very nice product, Wolfram System Modeler. Please check that out. And that's how I got into this amazing world of the Wolfram technology. So you can see that I really like airplanes. Now, if we go ahead, what are we going to talk about today? Top Gun. You know, I think everyone has seen the movie Tom Cruise back in the 80s, the Tomcats, everyone playing volleyball and whatnot. But Top Gun actually exists. And before the time of the Tomcats in the 80s, it was founded by this guy, Dan Pedersen, the actual founder of Top Gun. And in this book, which I cannot recommend enough, he tells a story of the real Top Gun. Let's go back into 1969 on Tyndall Air Force Base in the sunny state of Florida. In the height of the Vietnam Air conflict, the seasoned Air Force pilots and the Navy pilots got together to discuss airplanes, to discuss tactics, to discuss what's going on. Because scoring-wise, the United States was not doing that good when it came to air-to-air. In that place, there was this pilot, John Boyd, presented their view from the US Air Force. They presented a new revolution called the energy maneuverability theory. It was proposed in 1966 by the fighter pilot, John Boyd, who came to be an historical figure, but also by a mathematician, Thomas P. Christie. So you see, in 1966, we have already broken the speed of sound. Incredible airplanes had already flown using gas turbine engines. The thing is not that we did not understood airplanes very nicely, but this was a new methodology, a mathematics of dogfighting. Well, of course, the Air Force was exposing their view, and the Top Gun from the Navy was listening. The inter-service rivalry was inevitable. On the book, of course, it's described as a word I really like called coopetition. There is cooperation, but there's also a little bit of competition, healthy, hopefully. So the debate begins because the Navy pilots had not heard about this idea from the Air Force. And then John Boyd made what Dan Pedersen said was an infamous remark. No US pilot should ever dogfight a Soviet MiG because it was mathematically proven by his theory that the American F-4 Phantom jet was inferior. So we've heard all the time, the maths do not lie. And that was exactly what he was saying, that this should not be live. And eventually, what happened? That when the Top Gun pilots listened, then Ski on top told Rattler, the book says, poked him on the ribs and said, why don't you say something, Rattler, about this mathematical based remark? What exactly did he say? And do you think they were agreeing? Was there something different? This was a new theory from the US Air Force planted to the Top Gun Navy pilot. So What did he say? What did Rattler say to John Boyd? Well, before we go into that, we can start by describing the actual math and the energy maneuverability theory. It is a tiny bit advanced, but it is the mathematical description of the aircraft in the terms of its energy state. So we have said before, we knew about aerodynamics, we knew about gas turbine engines, stability and control, but this was another perspective of the problem, one that was focused on energy. And the basis, as with many of the energy-related problems, is just that the total energy was the sum of kinetic and potential. So the question was, in this time, which airplane would have the advantage? The one that is flying faster or the one that is flying higher? Well, John Boyd said that they were kind of the same. As we know, the energy was the same. And this is a phrase that gets repeated a lot to student pilots. It says speed and altitude equals performance. So it is a combination of these two, the one that gives you the actual performance of an airplane. And they even said that they were ambivalent, that they were the same. So how does that translate? Let's start by analyzing an airplane model. And yes, this is the American McDonnell Douglas F4 Phantom. This is actually another type of model. This is a scale plastic model that I built myself from a hobby inherited from my dad. But now let's see, instead of looking at the plastic model, let's see what's the model that was implemented in the Wolfram language. It's an association with some very basic and at some point rough data about the coefficient of drag, the drag increase, some aerodynamic coefficients, everything that you can find in Wikipedia. And of course, the approximation is a bit rough, but here's where my model begins and here is where my model ends. So it's really, really, really simple. Let's see what information we can get out of it. And to analyze that, we can check on the forces of an airplane. When it's flying straight and level on accelerated flights, so here the airplane would be flying to the right of the screen, we have the four forces. It's as simple as that. The lift in green produced by the wings that balances the weight, the one that actually makes the magic of flying. And then you have your red thrust given to you by the engine, the one that allows you to move in the air. And then not wanting for you to move in the air comes the drag, a product of viscosity, pressure differences, and even supersonic elements. But it's as simple as that. The four forces that act on an airplane. This will be the basis of everything else. But now what happens when the airplane starts turning? Then these forces are no longer in equilibrium, and then things change. We've all heard about the word agility. We use it in our everyday lives. But when talking about the context of aeronautical engineering, and especially for fast fighters, the agility is the ability to make rapid control change in airplane motion. This is a term not even mentioned that much in aeronautical engineering. We usually hear about maneuverability, the ability to make rapid changes, and controllability, the ability to precisely guide the airplane through those changes. And there's usually a balance between these two. A very maneuverable airplane, like a combat airplane, it's a little bit less controllable. So it takes a while. You need a little bit more of a fancy controller and whatnot. But these two, maneuverability and controllability, are subsets of agility, like the A4 Skyhawk that we can see over there in the picture, the one from Chester in the Top Gun movie. Now let's see how these forces, how the forces that we saw before, we can visualize them. Over here, I have a very simple script. Right now, we look at the airplane from the back. So lift equals weight. Nothing is strange. Everything's as it was from before. But what happens when we start to bank, when we start to tilt the airplane's wings? Okay, now we have a centripetal force, the red one, which, as you can see, is nothing else but a component of the lift that is always orthogonal to your wings over here. So now it's only gonna be the cosine of your lift, the one that's balancing the weight. And everything else, the sign is gonna become your centripetal force, the one that actually makes your airplane to turn. But we never get a free lunch. And there is another force that we don't like called the centrifugal that is starting to appear also. And what we don't really like about the centrifugal is that purple one that says over there load factor. There is a resultant that instead of now pulling your airplane as 1 Gs as your weight, now you see the load factor over there. Now when we are at 2, your airplane's airframe and pilot is feeling twice its weight. So the so-called Gs, when pilots say, yeah, it's a super high G maneuver, it comes from there. And that will, of course, put some strains on the structure and on the aerodynamics of it. So the takeaway is that instead of just having a leveled flight, when we bank and we turn, we have these extra things. And what are the two most important parameters from a turning? The turn rate, which is the angular speed in degrees per second, the normal angular speed we all know, so how fast we complete the circle, and the turn radius, how tight, how big this circle is. Of course, a very agile airplane is going to be able to turn really fast at really high angular speeds and at really tight turn radiuses. So now let's see how all of this plays. Let's come back, and this is going to be what actually John Boyd discovered. The turn rate, omega, is going to be plotted on the y-axis, and then we're going to have speed on the x-axis. And using these very simple equations, we can get the lines of constant load factor. So you remember the G's that we were talking? Okay, so this would be the turn at 1 G, at 2 Gs, 3 Gs, and etc. So you can see that if you want to turn faster and at higher turn rates, so faster completing the circle, you're gonna be pulling much more Gs on your airframe. That's where the maneuvers are called, as said before, the high Gs. And now let's complement this. Now we had the turn rate, but it's missing the turn radius, as we mentioned before. So the horizontal distance from the airplane's flight path to the center of the circular turn. The equation, very simple. Now these straight lines appear. As you see, the term is linear. So now this information is starting to tell you not only about the constant G's, the load factor that your airplane is pulling, but also how tight your turn can start to begin. This is gonna be the grid upon which we're gonna build our diagram. Because as you see on the equations, they are still not altitude dependent and they are still not dependent on the airplane. We still have not used our very nice phantom model. This is just the playground of the turning places. As said here, lines of constant ready, the straight ones, and curved ones, lines of constant load factor. The airplane itself has some limits. It has aerodynamic limits and structural limits. The aerodynamic one, because the wing cannot produce infinite lift, because as you saw, the tighter you need to turn, the more lift you need to produce, and the wing, there's a point in which it will be restricted. And when it comes to structure, the same, the famous high G maneuvers where the pilots are weighting 3 times their mass. Well, the airframe and the pilot cannot withstand infinite Gs. So let's plot these airplane limits in the playground that we were saying before. First, let's start with the lift limit. When the wings cannot produce enough lift to balance a hard turn, it's gonna be this red line over here, aerodynamic limit. Everything to its left, the wing cannot produce enough lift to maintain that airplane flying at such tight turns, low speeds. You see the equations, nothing fancy. The audience is used to working with much more difficult and complex things. We talked about the aerodynamic limit. Now let's put the 2 structural limits. One comes from the G's, the maximum load factor that you can sustain, 9 Gs, and then the pilot might already be feeling, blood coming out of the brain and some gray vision and whatnot. And if we plot this, of course, at a fixed limit, usually given by structural limitations, we're going to have the merging of these two, the aerodynamic and the structural G limit. And it's going to be a special speed called the corner speed. You see, this is the uppermost point on your graph. So this is the most tight turn rate, the fastest turn rate that your airplane can achieve ever. And in fact, it's called instantaneous turn because we will see that it cannot even do that indefinitely. But there's another limit missing. Over here, given by its limit speed, the airplane cannot go ad infinitum at extremely fast speed. At some point, the dynamic pressure will be troublesome for the airframe. Yeah, we plot this vertical line over here, the V never speed, which is also given by the manufacturer, given from structural limitations. And now we have the complete pictures of the limits of the airplane. And you can also see why these diagrams are called doghouse diagrams, because they kind of look like the House of Spike from Tom and Jerry. I don't know. Anything outside of these red boundaries is not permitted for this specific airplane. Aerodynamic limitation and structural limitation. But now comes the interesting part. Now comes the actual innovation from John Boyd. There is something called specific excess power, which is nothing else but the energetic coin that the airplane can trade for maneuvering. So the energy state of your airplane that you can exchange for climbing, for turning, or for accelerating. And the units are quite interesting because you have units of power over force. And power over force gives you meters per second. A specific excess power unit is given in meters per second. When you have positive excess energy, when you have positive energetic coin, you can trade it and everyone is happy. When you have zero, then you're at your maximum. And then you cannot trade it anymore because when you go and it becomes negative, then you need to trade either altitude or speed to maintain that specific performance. And that is the thing that it gets plotted inside of the structural and aerodynamic limits. Anything below the blue line in continuous, those are places where you have excess power. You are in an advantage. Your airplane can climb, can accelerate, can turn. When you are on the blue line, you're on the very limit. And when you are passing those lines, then at some point you're gonna have to decrease either altitude or speed to keep maintaining that line. And there's nothing much left to it. But how bad is it? How bad is our model? You remember those 10 lines of the Phantom? Well, this is the product of a multi-million-dollar flight campaign, the one from the Phantom. And this is the Wolfram Mathematica, code. No solving the Jacobian, no vector algebra, nothing. It just really, you see, for example, the peak, it's at around 17 degrees per second. We're getting there. The lines are not that similar because here you have some things from the engine, but okay, 14 degrees per second. I think it's a great approximation given its simplicity. But now that we have this, why did he say that you should not fight a MiG-21 against the F-4 Phantom? Well, if we use a similar model to the Phantom, but now from the MiG-21, the Soviet one, and we superimpose them on top of each other, then we can get all this information. The Phantom over here in blue and the MiG-21 in gray. For example, we can get its maximum instantaneous turn rate, so the peak. The MiG-21 has it higher, actually. And for you to get an idea, it's been agreed by fighter pilots that 1 degree per second can already give you an advantage. So you can see how high this is. And also the Phantom over here, you see it's a little bit more below. You have a MiG-21 advantage in that sense. Maximum sustained turn rate, this point where your specific excess power, your energetic coin, you're flying at the limit. Your MiG-21 can also do higher turn rates instead of the Phantom. You see this difference over here. So there is a MiG-21 advantage at low airspeeds and higher turn rates. So you should not maybe battle a MiG-21. Well, but there is another one. The F4 does have an advantage over here on its maximum speed. You see over here that when the MiG-21 has already reached its limit, the Phantom can already be having a lot of velocity. So this comes to say that there are two types of fighters. The energy fighter, like the Phantom could be, and the MiG-21. The Phantom will come fast, attacking, climbing, zooming, hit and run, always keeping energy. When the MiG-21 has an angles, it will like to be on chasing the tails, as we say, at slow maneuvering. And everything about fighter pilots, as they say on these books, the tactics go to take the opponent into a flight regime where they don't like it. So the Phantom taking the MiG-21 into faster speeds, or vice versa, the MiG-21 taking the Phantom into lower speeds. It's always a combination of these two. This is also altitude dependent, something to remark. It's not the same at low altitude than at high altitude over here we can see. And they are also weight dependent. So you cannot get all the information from a single graph. You would have to prepare a lot of it. And then it comes to the conclusion. What did the Tom Gun pilot say to Boyd? Quoting from the book, "Sir, I just don't think you know anything about another pilot before the first turn." This was the Navy answering about the mathematical modeling. And if you don't know that, you cannot say that a MiG will run every time. Dan Pedersen says that there is something that cannot get mathematically modeled. He said that. Airplanes can be parameterized, but people cannot. Pilots could not in this time before the advanced computers. EM is not wrong. Amazing airplanes have come from that, the F-16 Viper, the F-15. But the opinion of the Top Gun pilots in that time was that it has little to say about pilots and tactics. So the conclusion, I would say, it's up to you also, my friend. The pilot is part of the equation. It cannot be quantified as human beings. And there is something inherent about being there, about the sense of what's going on around us that some people say cannot be replaced by cameras, sensors, and algorithms. Some days ago in May, here at Lynn Shopping, Saab flew the first airplane completely piloted by AI, the Gripen pilot. So how is this gonna change? Can this also get parameterized, as Boyd said, mathematically? Or will it still be a need of pilots to be up there in the cockpit for the future? I think that only time will say. And of course, besides the references that I use, they are available for all of you. There is a step-by-step guide available upon request, because I saw online that there's a lot of explanations about the EM diagram as said today, but not that many to say it step-by-step how to actually plot it analytically. So if you are in the need of that, please send me an email and I'll be glad to help. And I also like to put a little statement about AI usage, since now everybody uses it. I did use ChatGPT for generating and modifying Wolfram language code. I myself, I don't have a computer science background, and it's just amazing how good the ChatGPT and the Wolfram GPT works with system modeler, with Wolfram, with the Wolfram language. And I was getting ahead of my time because the next step could be to implement this in the Wolfram system modeler aircraft library and see how that turns out. So thanks a lot for listening, and I'm open to any questions if there would be any. Thank you so much, if not for coming. Rohit, can you please share your slides after the presentations? Of course, I will. I will, for sure. Thanks. Can you send me the notebook? Yes, I can send you both, Zvi, the notebook from generating these ones and the slides, of course. Thank you, Chris Kennedy, for the feedback, and Dr. Clement, thank you so much for attending. I take a lot of inspirations from your LinkedIn posts, especially when coming about the, the modelic and stuff. Thank you, Kuva. Thank you, Zvi. Thanks everyone here for coming. Let's see if there's someone on the Q&A. Boyd talks about entropy. Yes, that is also quite interesting, because when you talk about energy, it's impossible not to talk about entropy. So there is a lot of juice that can be taken out of this John Boyd's theory. This is just the very, very beginning. And the more you dig, the more interesting it gets. And these diagrams, these doghouse diagrams, are actually used by pilots for some of them that I've talked with. These ones and a specific excess power thrust, because here you can get the fastest climb and whatnot. So yes, there is a huge world over here when it comes to aircraft performance, and everyone's more than open to discuss it. Thanks everyone for coming today, and hope you enjoy the presentation. Awesome, let's see. Can you show a diagram of a modern jet for comparison? Asks Rafael Choya. I would gladly do so. But then this, and I think it's easier even to do with a lot of assumptions. You could do it because you take a lot of geometric parameters and things. This would be something interesting to do. The bad part would be that those doghouse diagrams for modern airplanes, if we want to do some kind of validation now, those are extremely top secret. So it would be interesting to make one for the new airplanes, but we would probably have to wait a couple of decades until the information gets public, if it ever gets public, to see how well our diagrams were. And yes, that would be quite interesting too. Well, if there is no more questions, I really appreciate all of you joining. And yes, please let me know if you have, if you want. As I said before, the invitation is open about the code. Unless you're a student, and then you might have to really use this code for an assignment, at least in our department, then I might only share the figures. But everyone else, of course, you're more than welcome. The equations will be there. Thank you so much for attending here, and have a nice remaining of the talk.